Great, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here virtually, which I suppose is apt for the nature of my research. So thank you, Chris, for that fantastic introduction as well. So I'll get straight into my agenda. I'm thinking overall I'll take, and I'm actually just going to check the time here as well. Yeah, all good. I'm going to take about a half an hour. But really what I want to go through today is the who, though Chris, you've covered that, so I'd say that'll be very quick. The who, the what, the why, and the how. And go through, I have a survey and completed survey findings. I'll talk through that. I have compiled an initial corpus of international virtual team meetings, and I have some very much work in progress quantitative corpus findings. And I'll finish off with next steps on the research road. And really at the end of what I'm looking for is any inputs and feedback. As Chris said, I'm a third year PhD researcher, so it's still very much, I'm learning very much as I go. So all your inputs, because you have so much experience as a group, I would really appreciate too. Okay. So I think, as I said, I'll keep this very quick. As Chris mentioned, I have 24 years experience in a variety of business and software development support roles in global technology companies. So Hewlett Packard originally, and then it was an American company that were subsequently taken over by Siemens, which I think it's a household name. In that time, I have over 20 years experience managing multicultural teams and working in virtual teams. So academically, I think we've covered most of this. We were chatting just before we started about a conference in Florida. I'm a member of the Association of Business Communication. We have a European branch. And we also, I'm also a member of the special interest groups, which there are intercultural, there's research, and consulting as well. And I'm a member of the CALS, which is based here in UL, and the Irish English Network. I haven't contributed to that yet, but I hope to with my research as it progresses, looking at Irish English speakers. Finally, and last but very not least, and most of you know Fiona very well, Professor Fiona Farr is my supervisor, and it's fantastic support to me. So moving on to the research focus. I've said, yes, I have all this experience in the technology sector, but it's not just because I have the experience that I chose to focus on it. It's a significant employer in Ireland. I mean, all the big players are here. So we, our Googles, our PayPals. There's a hyperlink on this presentation. But as well, we have a lot of very successful Irish startups, or even, people that would have gone over to the likes of California, Silicon Valley, and set up what are now major and global companies. So for that reason, we need to educate Irish graduates to work in the technology sector, and not just as engineers. But we also need to look at all the supporting functions, if you think of it from logistics to HR and learning and development. And really, no matter what job that our graduates go into, and as they progress in their careers, they need to have the soft skills. So we know we're upskilling as a national educational policy on the technical skills, but thankfully the government agree with me that we also need to focus on the soft skills and on intercultural communicative competence. And then my study focuses on virtual teams, international virtual teams. And another reason for staying with the technology sector is that even pre-COVID, in virtual teams and virtual team meetings were the norm. I had a lot of experience in it. So when COVID hit, to me, it was like going back into a work environment. It wasn't completely alien to me. And even though we know that COVID, is under control, we're still going to have a mixture as we're doing today. And there's a lot of advantages to working virtually and reaching a global audience. So moving on to my research aims, really what I want to do is I want to learn from a sector that is experienced in virtual communication, and by the end of my studies, have a plan in place to develop experience-based training. And I see this training, or this being delivered across modules, or across faculties rather. I don't see it just for engineers, or just for business students, or just for applied languages students. Everyone needs to communicate, no matter what job they are in. And also professional learners, because if you talk to any of them, and we see it, we have intern programs are very popular for our large companies. So they onboard their graduates. So they also need to learn communication skills. They don't naturally walk into the workplace with them day one. Really, when I'm looking at communication skills, I'm looking at intercultural communication skills. I'm looking at it as per this diagram, which I really like, from Spencer, Oti and Kadar, is it encompassing not just traditional nation-based theories, but professional and social group memberships. I mean, we're a culture, a small culture in ourselves here in the IVO network. We're a professional group. As well, and what really I like about this pictorial is it talks about culture and interaction, meaning and interaction, very much, what, one of the kind of foundations of applied linguistics, I suppose. And that the way I look at it is, you can't sit down students and say, okay, this is what you need to learn, and you'll be able to communicate interculturally. All we can do is provide them with a kit bag of communication awareness skills, so that they can then navigate their interactions in the workplace. I'm also hopeful that I can add to the existing academic knowledge base. Based on my reading to date and my literature reviews, I see that a lot of the literature is written from the manager perspective. I'm looking at it from the individual contributor perspective. Virtual team research is often happens maybe in a lab or in an educational environment, but I suppose I'm looking at it from an empirical workplace environment. And as well, I believe bringing in the native English speaker and looking at the concept of business English as a lingua franca, I can add to the literature on that. So moving on to my research and my research methodology, I started with the survey, and that is just kind of coming up to a year ago that I completed the survey. I learned so much from doing the survey and from doing a pilot survey, because my pilot survey, it taught me to change the way I was asking my questions. Initially, what I was doing was, tell me of a communication success that you've had in an international virtual team, or tell me about an issue you faced. I was getting great stories about how to run an effective virtual team meeting, but I wasn't getting the communication behavior. So by parsing out the questions, learning from the pilot survey, that really helped. I used LinkedIn to connect with participants. And I'm actually going to do a YouTube video in conjunction with the Association for Business Communication on building a network and engaging with research participants through LinkedIn. But what worked, obviously, I had a first level connection network, so that was definitely a help. And then I suppose I mined second level connections in technology companies. And personally, what I found very effective was looking to graduates of the University of Limerick. They were very supportive. I had 113 participants in the final analysis, and I was able to collate quantitative data to build a framework of the technology sector in Ireland. So it wasn't just me with my experience saying, oh, this is what the technology sector is. The survey and the quantitative data allowed me to paint a picture of this is who works in the sector. And I also gathered qualitative data on the communication challenges and successes, and then I translated them into a set of competencies for working in international virtual teams. I had to include a question on COVID because of the timing. It would have, just to see what the impact was. So more on this, and to moving on and looking at my quantitative survey data and the participant profile. So even though company name was optional, I got 47 participant companies listed. They remain confidential, but I'm very happy that I have a good spread of inputs from the global players and from smaller companies, from Irish startups. 64% of my respondents were male, 36% identified as female. Initially, I was pushing to get more female participants, but I got some very good feedback at a conference in the summer. They said, well, are you focusing on gender? Is gender like, a primary research goal? And I went, no. So, it is what it is. There are, I do have a higher percentage of male versus female. With regard to job profiles, software hardware engineering is the highest job profile, followed then by business operations, which again is what you expect to see in the Irish technology sector. We have our development, our research and development with our engineering, and then we have a myriad of business functions, back office business functions that are managed from an Irish office. I asked a question about, have you worked abroad, and if so, for how long? So I think it's significant that over 50% of the participants have worked abroad, and that's outside of summer jobs. I asked the question, do you speak any other language, including Gaelic or Irish, our native language? I won't say shockingly, because it's unsurprising, because the national figures support this. 66% of our participants do not speak any other language. English is their only language. And I think we need to keep this in mind. If English is the only way that they can communicate verbally, or the only language through which they can communicate, then having an awareness of the different codes and international English, BELF, can only help. So moving on to look at international virtual team meetings in my survey, it was an average of 7 participants per meeting and 3.5 hours per day spent in such meetings. Younger age group, they were only averaging 1.5 hours a day. So you're definitely, as you progress in your career in the technology sector, more and more time is spent in such meetings. 60 different nationalities were listed by participants, up to 13 per meeting. So the figure 4 just summarizes the top 14 countries or regions where it made sense. Or I put together the Nordics, for example, or Asia Pacific. Unsurprisingly, 72% of our participants are dealing in international virtual team meetings with North Americans, and there is a prevalence of US companies in Ireland, technology companies. So figure 5 here, that looks at the purpose. I said, well, what are you doing in these meetings? And they were allowed to answer, they were allowed to select more than one choice or another, but a lot of them felt their answers fitted into the predefined categories. What I was delighted to see was that the decision making, the brainstorming, the more, higher up the taxonomy, the more creative tasks, because the literature on virtual teams advocates, I suppose going back as well, advocates for virtual teams are good for straightforward tasks or information sharing. But when it comes to actual planning and decision making, it's better in a face-to-face environment. And some of it is was to do with the recent pandemic. All this was happening online and does happen online in the technology sector. So I did ask the question, what impact, if any, did the recent pandemic have on your IVT communication? 40% of the responses were categorized as positive, 34% as neutral, and only 25% as overtly negative, based on a qualitative analysis. So maybe somewhat surprising, but the negative, and let's start with the negative. And you can see there that there were more reasons, more negative responses. But the largest one was relationship building, but it was all really to do with people. I mean, the second one was missing discussion with the local team, new hire onboarding. It was all to do with, well, I'm not getting to build the relationship if I'm a new hire and I haven't actually got to meet my colleagues, or I'm no longer getting to connect that same level of connection. Moving on to the positive, people had embraced digital collaboration tools, computer-mediated communication tools. One massive advantage was being able to record and playback and check something and really use, in the digital collaboration tools had been integrated into the daily work life of our participants. What I like to see was it had leveled the virtual playing field. Everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was sitting at home, you know, communicating virtually. Previously, it could be a group in a room, in an office, and then with the minority of attendees actually offshore and remoting into the meeting. So it really made people think, okay, this is, you know, I need to communicate, and I need to communicate, you know, properly in a virtual team environment. So moving on now to look at successful communication and communication issues based on my survey data. Just to note, and what I did as well for the COVID response is I used qualitative software, I used IVO, and I was able to then identify categories of successful communication. So what I did, I identified far more categories than I'm displaying here. These in turn, in order to fit them on the page, I rolled them up to what I call umbrella communication categories. So my biggest one, and I mean, you can see from the percentage there, nearly half, cited information sharing as being the top indicator of success. Now, this does have a few subcategories, it'll be 10. So getting the message across clearly and concisely, as per the quote there, and that would be from cross-functional, focusing on facts, so not kind of just, you know, waffling around it, actually getting the point across, I suppose, again back to clear messaging, asking for feedback, and even being able to clearly explain regional specifics came up there. The second highest category of communication success of competency was managing the conversation, and this included like the ability to direct the conversation and make sure everybody got a chance to speak. This was less. So kind of going back to information sharing was the top category and the main category for my younger age group. It was as they developed in their careers, you could see them managing the conversations and other successful communication categories or competencies were then displayed. Usually, I'm not going to go through them all, but visual aids, I think, and you know, presentation and sharing screen. Own language awareness, because I want to move on to talk about language as an issue. So our participants were aware that, you know, they gave very explicit scenarios of, oh, I know I need to not talk as quickly. I need to moderate my accent. I need to avoid Irishisms, or I won't be understood by an international and intercultural team. Having a formal meeting structure definitely was an advantage, and then of using digital collaboration tools. Moving on to the issues. Language-related issues topped the issues list. A lot of issues there. And I suppose I was happy to see this, as I've been foregrounded in linguistic research, but over 50% of the language issues that were raised were attributed to others' lack of fluency or clarity in English. So even though the person who was speaking in the virtual environment, even though that person, it could have been their L2, their L3, often their L4, the Irish participant, because they were all Irish English speakers, the Irish participant felt it was their responsibility to be better at conveying their message. Only 11% acknowledged their own lack of language ability. It was good to see that language pragmatics, with differences of directness in speech, body language even, going into the multimodal side, was more balanced, with participants reflecting on their own weaknesses as well as those of others. Other issues, managing the conversation and information sharing. So they were positive. So when they led to success when they worked well, but when they didn't work well, and it was hard to get, and I think we can all appreciate this, getting others to participate in a meeting. And there was cultural and functional differences cited as the reason. So nation-based culture, and then functional and professional group cultural differences were both given. And the quote there, and information sharing, it was the differing level of knowledge of participants. So this, again, this isn't down to what we traditionally think of the nation-based culture and intercultural. This is a culture, this is, if you're explaining, if you are a software engineer and you need to explain an issue, a customer issue, well, you need to explain it to a non-technical person, how to do that, or having difficulty doing that successfully. Or if you have to present to corporate management, you need to succinctly get your message across. They do not want to know how the code works. So I got really good instances of that. And there was a challenge. Irish professionals feel there is a challenge to be heard by the corporate headquarters. The US mothership would come out and announce, and they were, the corporate body, they would say, okay, we have one global process. But that global process may not fit every region, every country, every currency, every language, every local law. And what was interesting it's not the Irish professionals saying, well, in Ireland we do this, because Ireland isn't necessarily the biggest market for the Irish technology sector. It's that they are then the springboard, or they are the mediator for international. So they could be representing Asia or European countries. So that was very interesting for me, and one I suppose I can appreciate from my own experience. So the final, I suppose, and I have this actually in my analysis, quantitative analysis as well for the corpus, is what was missing. Maybe it's going to be something throughout my research career. I'll always look for what's not there. But small talk. There was no. So give me an instance of when you've communicated successfully, and break that down for me. And nobody said, well, it was the fact that I got 5 minutes to chat at the beginning of the virtual meeting, and even at the beginning of this meeting, we were chatting, but it is limited virtually. So people very much focused on success, or getting over the issues, as being needing to get the job done. And you can see that from the word cloud. The words are, positive, but the focus is on the job. And one quote that I liked, and I had to look up Parkinson's law, which means that if you're given a certain amount of time, if you're given an hour, you'll fill an hour, which I feel like I'll be doing today. But what they said was, well, if you don't need the hour, then the meeting can end. You don't have to stay there for the hour. So that was, I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. They didn't need to make the small talk. So moving on to my corpus analysis, I'm in the process of creating a transcribed corpus of international virtual team meetings. It's called the IVTC, so I suppose unsurprisingly, and it's very much in progress. I'm aiming for 150,000 words. I'm thinking in tokens because I'm doing my analysis, but about 80,000 words, 92,000 tokens. Approximately, and I will be doing quantitative, and I'm going to touch on that today, and I will be going down the qualitative conversation analysis methodology route as well. And I will be looking at my surveys, not like just my surveys done. It would be very much looking back and saying, right, what is the delta? Is there a delta in the perception of how Irish English speakers believe they contribute verbally in international virtual team meetings, and the reality? So with regard to my initial corpus collation, my participants, I'm very lucky. I've got one company onboarded. I've signed a non-disclosure agreement. They're an international Irish-founded software company. And I have 2 sets of IVT meetings across 2 teams, as per the details here on this slide. I didn't attend the meetings, and they said they didn't want me to because I would be an alien attendee. And I love that phrase. I was like, okay, I won't. So the meetings are specific. So I do want to collect more data. But what the meetings are is that they are Scrum and refinement meetings. So software design teams, they work in Scrum teams, which is very much, and they work in cycles, so like 2-week iterative cycles of software design. But the Scrum team meetings are daily updates each day of the 2-week cycle, where they check in, and they have a visual workload tool. They have tickets assigned to them, and they're like, this is what I've done, this is what I'm working on. So it is very specific. The refinement meetings are longer meetings. They actually work together online. They might update the system, and they look at what they're going to demo at the end of the 2-week cycle, which is known as a sprint. So they're mainly technical participants that I have to date: engineers, product owners, and product managers. I have, I said, 2 teams. Nationalities, I am delighted with the breadth of nationalities I have. I have 2 Irish participants in each team, not necessarily in every meeting. Team 1 is predominantly male, and team 2 is male, female. It's quite balanced. Okay, so, and these slides this is hot off the press, so bear with me if I have any kind of hesitations or stumble over any of this. I just want to say it's very much data analysis in process. But I have compiled a corpus. The company sent me teams of recordings of their IVT meetings using Microsoft Teams. And very much with the advice of the IVO team, I used Otter transcription software, and the word transcriptions I was able to extract with Microsoft Teams, but I felt that Otter delivered more accurate individual word transcription. I know MS Teams Bacon Jam was one, and to this day the Bacon Jam it transcribed. I never went back to look, but that was definitely one that Teams wasn't getting. I did do manual transcript updates, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because this is exactly what you guys have done as well in the IVO team, because Otter, it misses fillers, and it doesn't capture, it excludes overlapping speech. I'd load my transcripts into Sketch Engine, so that's the tool that I use to create my corpus. And then with regard to my analysis, what I've done is I've done a keyword, term, and word cluster analysis using the BNC Spoken 2014 as a reference corpus. And then I have supporting data from Cambec, which I was delighted to get access to Cambec recently. Cambec is the way Cambec, I'm managing, I'm analyzing, and I'm working in Sketch Engine, but Cambec isn't its own corpus. It's a subset of the Cambridge International Corpus, and it is loaded based on my access as a text type. So I can't directly use the corpus as a reference corpus, but I was able to do a word cluster frequency list review and comparison, and I have full access to concordances. So the data it's brilliant to have that. So what have I done? So the next few slides just cover kind of an initial analysis, and I'm calling them my toe dippers. I'm analyzing. I've got in, and this is what I found so far. But very much, and I'll go through it. I'm looking for feedback on some of this as well. So starting off, a keyword analysis, and that's based on the BNC Spoken. Which is general conversation. That it's over 1 million words, I think, 1 million tokens of general conversation. So what I'm doing is comparing my corpus, which is the Scrum team meetings, to general spoken English. And unsurprisingly, I feel like I say unsurprisingly a lot at the moment, but unsurprisingly, there is a very high level of meta language and specialized lexis. So the top 50 keywords, using BNC as a reference corpus, I was able to identify that 64% of them, which is this list here, are actually defined as Scrum team lexis. So they are they're words that are used in the software development process. So some of them, like UI, is user interface, QA is quality assurance, it's the test environment. If you're testing software, it goes through a QA process. I'm not going to go through them all. I don't even know if I would accurately represent some of the more accurate technical terms. 14 are unique to IVTC. Some of them have different meanings. So sprint is like to sprint the length of a field, is in the BNC Spoken, but the sprint is the 2-week software design cycle for a Scrum team. Default, which was I think was number 50 on the list, and obviously 32 of the Scrum team lexis. Like default it's got different usage in the BNC. So it'll say, well, by default, or somebody defaulting on a loan payment, whereas it is used more within the system in the IVTC. So it as in a default drop down. If you have a drop down menu, if a language drop down menu, the default language is English, which means that when you click in, it populates to English. Moving on to the next kind of piece of analysis, and what became very quickly evident doing the transcriptions was the way that the turn taking is very structured. And this is the nature of Scrum teams. And they're very quick meetings. They average 16.5 minutes. And if you think up to team 2 had up to 15 members that would give an update in that time. So it's literally like one after the other. There are certain openings that are used, certain handoffs or nominations and closing. So 32% of the top keywords are team member names. So it's not unusual in a business corpus to have names, because that's in a meeting you're talking, group of people and you refer to somebody by their name, but it is higher due to this turn nomination. When I got into kind of the larger, so I've already talked about the keywords, which are individual words, and when I got into terms, when I got into 2-word terms, again it was specialized lexes. But when I went as far as 4-word clusters relative to the BNC spoken, the following terms, which can be considered under turn taking or opening closing terms. So the first one, have a great day. That sounds like an interpersonal talk, but in fact it was used repeatedly by an individual as transactional talk to close a meeting. So it was like, okay, have a great day, and everybody would go bye, bye, bye. It really just closed it. Who wants to start was an opener, and to move away from any chit chat at the beginning of the meeting to, right, who wants to start? And then the other ones they were literally handoff phrases. So we're like, and you have the example down at the bottom. That's pretty much me, Sarah. And then what you see here as well is please and thank you. So please and thank you were being used. They were the percentage was far higher. So even though they don't come up in keyword and relative to the BNC, because the please and thank you are in frequent use, I think it's 0.11% IVTC was thank you alone. But they're being used differently. So if I looked at it compared to Canbec. Canbec, bearing in mind their face-to-face meetings, had not just thank you, it had thanks a million, like pass this, would you like a cup of tea? Yes, thanks, milk, no sugar. That, I know that's kind of face-to-face meeting, but there was a difference in use, whereas here, please and thank you was very much, okay, Sarah, please, John, thank you. And off they went. So there was a lot of naming and a lot of please and thank you with marking the turns in the discourse. Going on to a Canbec comparison, a direct Canbec comparison, and again, I think what wasn't there, what was missing in IVTC. So what was interesting, the high frequency clusters in Canbec were absent in IVTC. And these were discourse markers in terms of so focusing the conversation in or at the same time, which was used as a conversation link discourse marker in Canbec. What I thought was good was at the same time, it did appear 5 times in IVTC, but it was literal. It was like you run this piece of the software program and that piece at the same time. It was more idiomatic in Canbec. At the end of the day, there were no, and Hanford Michael Hanford has actually talked about at the end of the day as a cluster, because I think it's being a 6-word cluster as well. But it was, even in Canbec, it's very limited to manufacturing companies, which my IVT meetings don't cover. So it's only a toe dipper. As I said, more work is needed to identify IVTC discourse markers. I'm very interested to work with the IVO team and see what discourse markers are being heard in virtual meetings as well. I'm thinking BELF, I'm thinking online communication factors. We've seen with please and thank you, they're being used in a different way. So yeah, more to come on that. And finally, on the actual analysis, and this is the one that I would love feedback on, because I don't know. I know what I want to say, but I don't know if I'm saying it yet. So deontic modals, I did not know what a deontic modal was, but what I did know when I looked at my corpus is that I had a high incidence of modal use. Unsurprisingly, so do other business corpora. And I'm coining this the modal of the workplace modal. So degrees, Costner describes degrees of obligations or necessity to perform acts. But in comparison to Cambeck, I have far higher usage in IVTC. So we need to, and we have to, our third and fourth on my frequency list, they're high up on the Cambeck list, but they're relatively, there's far more usage in IVTC. So what I realized, and taking we need to, and we have to, but I've included a snapshot of we need to, was they're both evoked, it's as if when you're saying we need to or we have to, what the participants were saying was the system needs to, the system has to. So I'm calling this system related use. It's representing how the the software needs to function. So it's not like we need to, and then there's task related, which is traditional deontic modal use, which is how team members would work together. So we need to test it, we need to email. But the system related use is, this is how the system needs to function. You could actually, in many cases, you could replace the system or the software, the application with we. It's very hard to get a clean example of this, but like the ones I've included here as edit each table. The system needs to actually automatically edit within. And then the second one, it's actual appointment scheduling software. So the system needs to determine, if you pick a time, then what room will the appointment slot into? So it's more of the automation of the needing to. Now in Cambeck, and based on Michael Hanford's publications as well, especially we need to, that because he's written about that, it's softer than we must. It can be used as more of an indirect face-saving modal. There's no hedging, there's no face-saving use in these two phrases that I can see in IVTC. It is very much that we need to get the job done. Okay, last slide. Okay, so my next steps. I have far more. I'm saying transcribing. I don't think there's. I overlapping speech. I still got transcription to do there, but coding, and I want to code for pragmatics. I want to code with humor, sarcasm, and BELF traits. The socio-emotional is there. The chit chat is there. They're a really well knitted together team. Or two teams, and I can hear it, but it will need to be more on a conversation analysis level and using pragmatic markers. So even just giving this example, like Peter says, oh, I picked up a ticket, so some work with the brilliant title. Okay, that's not going to be picked up quantitatively because, brilliant title, but he has been very sarcastic there. Do I factor in multimodal analysis as I have video as well as audio? What can I learn from the IVO team? And we were chatting about this at the outset. I'm contributing with Professor Fiona Farr to a special edition on workplace discourse. And finally, I need more data. I want more meetings. I would like a large group of Irish participants. I would also like different functions working together. I want to see that. I'm not seeing communication issues, and the company themselves don't think they have communication issues. So that's really what I would like. So there we go. I'm well able to talk. There's my bibliography, but I'd like to say thank you, and I would welcome any questions or any